Hello, 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 and welcome to Association Chat, your online discussion where we warm ourselves by the virtual fire, especially today when it's super hot outside where I am anyway. We warm ourselves by the virtual fire with topics of the day, welcoming thought leaders and trailblazers alike to join on in this online home for the community. I'm your host of Association Chat, Kiki L'Italien, and wow, okay, so things are a changing, and certainly sponsorship is one of those areas that has not consistently stayed the same, but is actually changing too. Sponsorship isn't what it used to be, and that's a good thing. In this episode of the Association Chat podcast, I'm speaking with the Bruce Rosenthal. Oh, you probably already know his name. He's very widely respected and known in the association industry. He also is the author of this great book, Mastering Association Corporate Sponsorships: How to Create Strategic Partnerships That Add Revenue and Member Value. I actually was honored to be able to read through this book, have an early copy, and provide my thoughts on it. I think that you'll enjoy it and learn a lot from Bruce joining us today. We're going to talk about this book, his thoughts on the traditional sponsorship model, how to fix it, and what forward-thinking leaders are doing right now to create more meaningful revenue-generating relationships with sponsors. So whether you are just starting out on creating some sort of sponsorship program from scratch, or if you're really ready to level up, this is hopefully going to be a conversation that you're going to get a lot out of. And that's enough of me talking right now. Let me go ahead and bring the great Bruce Rosenthal to the stage. Hi, Bruce. It's so great to see you.
Hey, hi Kiki. Hi everybody.
Hey, yeah. So, I know I kind of like jumped into talking about the book. I'm very excited that you did this and that you always are really good about putting your thought leadership out there and sharing your content, far and wide. But having this in one great spot, having a lot of this information in one great spot where people can access it as a resource, I think has just been really incredible. And so I'm so excited that you did this book, that you put it together, and that people can go out and buy it.
And good point, Kiki, because that was really the reason I decided to do it as a book. I actually had the idea 2 years ago, and I thought, well, I do a lot of posts on LinkedIn and a lot of articles and a lot of speaking, and everybody knows this stuff and everybody knows what I have to say. And I thought, looking at other leaders in the association space who have written books, it is valuable to have that kind of soup to nuts all in one book. Um, so it took the better part of last year to write the book and to really synthesize all this to not have a lot of detail. It doesn't have a lot of UBIT tax information and all the complexities, but it's definitely designed as a quick and easy read, really for anybody in an association. And it can often start with the person responsible for sponsorships and then I'd say, yeah, share it with your executive director or CEO and get her or him on board. And then with other staff leaders. And if it's a small staff, it really can be read by everybody on staff, or at least department heads, and really to get everybody on board and understanding what this whole process is and why it is so important for associations.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that. So, there's a big shift, and you have been a leader in helping associations move from a more transactional sponsorship type of relationship to these strategic partnerships being a key word here. What are the key differences, and why does this shift matter more now than ever?
Well, the reason it matters, and just a little bit on the time frame. So I had a stint as VP of corporate partnerships for a large association, and then about 8 years ago, I started consulting. So I was consulting for a couple of years before COVID and before the lockdowns. And when I would ask associations, or when I would ask corporate partners, um, why do you sponsor? Why do you not sponsor? And in many cases, pre-COVID, it was like, well, we've been a sponsor for 15 years, Bruce. We're always going to be there. We don't want to look like we're not supporting the organization. Um, and when I would do competitive analyses for associations pre-COVID, we'd come up with 10, 15, 18 different associations, the trade publication as competitors. And then COVID came, and everybody was used to sitting in front of a virtual screen on a webinar and using social media much more. And then when companies would offer webinars or white papers on social media, they'd capture the names of those folks. And all of a sudden, everything changed. So the competition became much wider. So now when I do competitive analyses for associations, it's 40, 50, as many as 60 different associations, companies, trade publications, LinkedIn groups, all the different places that companies can go to reach members. And in some cases,
Mhm.
the companies are doing that directly. They're taking those lists of people that checked off on their webinar form. Oh yeah, put my name on the list. So I'm talking to companies that have created an online community of 1,000 of the association's members, and they can go out there and reach and teach anytime. So that's changed the whole value proposition. And then when I ask the companies, are you going to continue to sponsor? And it's like, well, we had been a dedicated sponsor for 15 years pre-lockdown. Associations understandably couldn't have their conferences where most of the sponsorship opportunities were for 2 years during the lockdown. And our company didn't stop marketing for 2 years. We found other ways.
Yeah.
So then when the association said, oh, we're back in business, come on back to our convention, the companies in many cases would say, well, yeah, this is important, but we're not going to get the 20 by 20. We're going to get the 10 by 10, and we're not going to send 15 execs to the conference. We'll send three. And we may not sponsor the name badge lanyards. Maybe we'll just actually spend more time hanging out at the headquarters hotel bar in the evening, and we can do as much networking there as being a sponsor. And the one other thing that's changed, Kiki, is the company's doing a lot more measuring. And
Hmm.
again, pre-lockdown, it was like, yeah, we've been the sponsor, we better keep being the sponsor. And now it's however they define success. So it could be new contracts, some sort of ROI, cost of customer acquisition, clicks on white papers on their website, and they're comparing that to the value they get other places.
Hmm.
So when I talk to companies and they say, wow, we can actually get more leads from $10,000 of Google ads than a $50,000 sponsorship of the association, ouch, that's something to be aware of. And I think it's important to, with all of those challenges, to note companies truly would rather partner with associations and go off on their own. But if the association
Mm.
does make it too challenging, too many hoops to jump through, getting the company on the webinar schedule in 6 months, and the company's like, wow, we can do our own webinar in 6 weeks. Um, and to the other part of your good question, Kiki, so sponsorships are generally the terminology sponsorship and partnership has a lot of overlap, but basically, its sponsorships are very transactional. It's the logo visibility, the signage, the wave from the podium at the convention, and partnerships are truly bringing companies in as partners.
Yeah.
And in the interviews and the research I've done with companies over the years, back to when I managed the partner program at an association, companies are usually looking as partners for three big value propositions. So these are also the companies, these are the cream of the crop, the top 5, 10, 15, 20 companies among which could be hundreds of exhibitors or business forum members. They're looking for some sort of business development.
Hmm.
They do need some way of bringing business. Now, it's not the association's job to sell for them or to introduce them to a client personally. The companies, in many cases, do want some sort of business development payoff. They want some sort of brand elbow room. So, not necessarily exclusivity, but in the association where I used to work, big association, others can scale it up, scale it down based on the size of your association. But we probably had 30 marketing agencies in the exhibit hall among the 500 exhibitors. One of those was a year-long corporate partner. That one wanted to know how were they going to look different at the convention than the other
Right.
29 marketing agencies. And so it wasn't exclusivity. We weren't banning the other companies from being in the program or being exhibitors, but what made that one corporate partner different? And the third big one is thought leadership. Companies want to be recognized for what they are smart about and how they can help members. And the three of those are closely intertwined because if a company is positioned as a thought leader, it has more opportunities to do webinars or white papers or focus groups or whatever. That thought leadership will be that brand elbow rub that the company is looking for, and that will then lead to business development. So it's
The
helping companies go down that path without selling for them.
So there's nothing in what you just said that seems like it should be hard to understand. I think that all of us, when we hear something like that, we think, well, yeah, of course, we know why they're wanting to invest in this. They want to partner with us because they're going to want to have that build that business, develop that business, but also, as you say, for like having some way to stand out from the rest, a differentiator for like, look, how am I going to be amplified or my brand amplified as a result of this? And then also like the thought leadership doesn't seem like it should be rocket scientist or science, but yeah, it seems like there are still mistakes that are being made. So like, what are some of the mistakes that you see associations making when they are thinking about their sponsorship programs?
I think the key mistakes are still thinking the companies are looking for visibility. So
Mm-hmm.
when I talk to association staff and I'll say, what else do you think your association could offer to a company? It is usually around logos, visibility, signage, more logos, logo on the first and the last slide of the webinar. And I don't fault folks for that. This is the way we have been doing it for I don't know how many decades, maybe as long
Yeah.
as associations have been around in kind of in this iteration, 60, 80 years, it's been around visibility. And with social media, with outreach, companies don't really need that sort of visibility. And I'm not sure they ever needed it as much as we have thought they did. I have a friend who used to work for a large pharmaceutical company managing 40 association sponsorships. And he
Wow.
said the bane of his existence was the associations calling, could I get your logo reversed out of black? Could I get your logo in high resolution for a side? Could I get your logo in a different format? And it was like, that's not why we're a sponsor. And we really don't care if our logo is on the sign with 9 other logos anyway in the convention
Right.
center. That's not why we're a sponsor. So we generally think of visibility signage logos as the reason companies are want to be sponsors. Um, Secondly, we're not too innovative with the sponsorship programs, and I often hear, "Well, this is the way we've always done it," and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
"Well, why do you do it that way?" Well, I was hired, and this is the way Harvey used to do it. When did Harvey leave? When were you hired? 5 years ago. We're still doing it the same way. Or why do you have a sponsorship prospectus for your convention offering 30 different items? How many of those sell? Well, 6 or 7, but it gives companies a lot of choices. So it's very much this is the way we've always done it, which is,
Mm-hmm.
usually not the way we manage other programs and associations. I mean, often after the annual meeting, there's a big debrief: what worked, what didn't work, how should we do things differently. Websites are often revamped every couple years, but this seems to be kind of the wayward stepchild that never gets a lot of attention or revamped. And I think that the third area where associations are falling short is not working as a team. So as you mentioned, Kiki,
Mm-hmm.
from what I described earlier about a good sponsorship program, there should be nothing wrong with that, or nothing that anyone on the association staff or board would be opposed to. Um, but I think staff have long memories. So, I mean, I'll talk to associations about these practices, and they'll say, yeah, but I remember 5 years ago, we gave a company the opportunity to do a webinar and they just sold stuff. So it doesn't always work perfectly. There are ways that when we position the person in charge of sponsorships is really like an account exec in a marketing agency, they then work with the corporate sponsors and coach them and explain to them, okay, if you're going to do a presentation or a webinar or a presentation to our staff about your role as a corporate partner, don't start off with the org chart and when your company was founded and all that. Start with a
Right.
case study. How have you
Yeah.
helped our members? And when you talk about how you're helping members, don't say you helped our members by selling them the widget from page 37 of your catalog. How have you really made a difference for members? And that's what will get people's attention. It's the story and how you're making a difference. So it's often, and I think I have a line in my book that sponsorship is a team sport
Yeah.
and it needs to involve everybody on staff. Um, And we're often not thinking about it that way. And I've seen folks even with titles like director of sponsorship who say they've basically been told by the association executive director, go in your office, make more calls. I'm sure companies will want to give us money, and don't bother anybody else on staff, and don't bother me also. Your job is to make calls. So that
Yeah.
dialing for dollars is, or dialing faster for dollars is not a path to success.
Wow. Yeah. I feel like we've definitely have moved past that point, and, and rightfully so. Things need to change. The way that we communicate has changed. Certainly the technology has changed. And I think that people's expectations on the way that we communicate and the way that we engage with them, those have changed too. So why wouldn't our sponsorship programs, why wouldn't these partnerships evolve into a new space? One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, you have this framework that you've developed, the value framework that is in the book. And in this, it's really to help people to understand, to guide this planning and the thoughts around developing a successful sponsorship program. So could we go into that a little bit and talk a little bit about this value framework? Because I think it's really helpful for people to understand a little bit more on ways that they can plan and think about. Of course, you don't have to give all of the secrets away. People buy the book, and then you too can also explore this, but maybe just go through a little bit of the value framework.
Sure, I'd be glad to. So, yes, when you buy the book, page 49, the value framework.
Yeah.
So the V in value is really for, fostering visionary partnerships, thinking about this big picture, not more logos slapped on things, but really looking in a visionary way or scenario planning way. What are the different ways this could play out to benefit the association and the members and the corporate partners? Um, and then the A is about instilling alignment and really between the association and the sponsor. And that's with the full association. So I look at associations like a huge marketing and communications powerhouse. There are communications channels, there are marketing channels, there are members, there are segments of members, there are subject matter experts. This is something that would be envied by any marketing agency out there, or almost like a think tank to say we are this body of expertise and knowledge. And that's when companies are looking at partnering. It's not like, oh, we only want to partner for 3 days during the convention. Companies want to be aligned and to partner with the association year long. Doesn't mean every day, but different components throughout the year. um, so VAL is about really developing that leading edge with sponsor benefits. And what can you come up with that's a little bit different, that's a little bit outside the box, and that really meets the needs of each company. And the needs of each company will be different, and they may even change over time as the company changes or changes direction or changes its focus or its service mix for members. But really trying to be that leading edge of almost that wow factor of saying to a company, I just walked out of a senior staff meeting and I wanted to let your company know we're doing this new research project. And I think your company could have a really major role in that because this is your area of expertise. The downside of not doing that is the company reads about that research 4 months later and says, "Oh, that's our area of expertise. They didn't even call us to ask our opinion or to ask us to be
Oh,
on the
yeah.
task force." Um, and to create unified collaborations between the sponsors and the staff. So this is not kind of a one-off, we'll touch base every quarter and we'll see what you're interested in doing, but really creating these year-long campaigns or relationships or partnerships with companies. And I've always found that in every model that I've looked at of associations across industries, trades, professions, large and small, companies will pay more for unified packages than for pieces.
Mhm.
And I often
I
hear from associations, sorry, Kiki, we're doing pretty well. We're selling a lot of things. We're bringing in a lot of money. Seems to be working well. But then if we really talk to the companies and say, wow, would you be interested in packaging? Oh, that would be a much greater value and much easier. We wouldn't be getting all these calls and another purchase order and another decision. Um, so the packages, the unified packages work much better. Sorry, Kiki, I cut you off.
Oh, no, no. This is all good. This is gold. So when I'm thinking about these packages, or when any of us are thinking about these packages, I know that one of the big questions that's always on people's minds, it's about the pricing and the packaging of these opportunities. But how should associations approach pricing and packaging these sponsorship opportunities, especially in a competitive or a politically sensitive climate like DC in 2025?
Well, so and if that politically sensitive environment includes executive orders and all of that, it's really sitting down talking to each company. And I had an experience just a couple months ago on behalf of a client meeting with 8 of their corporate partners for one-on-one confidential conversations. And we asked the companies a number of questions about what they see value of sponsorship, why they sponsor, what else they're looking for in sponsorship, how they measure sponsorship. And at the end of each discussion with each corporate partner, I said, "Oh, by the way, the last 4 months, a lot of stuff's going on.
Yeah.
How is that impacting what you're doing?" And 8 out of 8 said, doesn't really affect my day-to-day work. I'm in charge of
Wow.
marketing. I'm in charge of
Yeah.
outreach. I'm in charge of working with this group of professionals. Now, there are senior execs in our company that are planning ahead over manufacturing. What is the impact of tariffs? Do we need to make changes on our corporate website because of DEI? But my work day to day is working with associations. And I'm off, and when I finish this show, I'm off to the next conference, and we're
Right.
doing 2 sessions there. So I don't think we should assume that companies are changing what they're doing. We need to ask them. And I think also just asking them shows interest and empathy. And they were like, well,
Hmm.
thanks for asking. However, no big
Yeah.
impact. We're doing our job. So don't assume we're pulling back or we're not going to support. We will see is a moving target. But I think the other point to all of those changes, political and policy changes going on, um, is bring in the companies for discussions with the staff and with the board. Or if your association is setting up a task force on, you're in the manufacturing space, impact of tariffs. Let's set up a task force of members and committee chairs. Include some of the corporate partners on that task force because
Yeah.
they're wrestling with the same issues. And I used to work with an association CEO who pointed out something that makes a lot of sense. The association's members and the
Hmm.
corporate partners' customers are the same people.
Yeah.
We're all trying to solve problems for the same people. So the companies call them customers or clients, the association calls them members. And those members are kind of back to the competitive part of it. Members will get good information wherever they can get it. So if the
Right.
companies start putting out a white paper on tariffs, why aren't we bringing that in-house and doing it with the association? So it's co-branded as an association corporate partner white paper.
You've always been someone who has been really good about walking the talk. Like you put into action in your own ways that you engage with the community and with other consultants and with really everyone in the association industry. I've just witnessed this, observed it over time, where you have a very collaborative approach to everything, and it's one of those thing where it's like, let's look for the win-win situation for everyone here. And I think that that's something that is both admirable and also something that is unfortunately not as common as one would expect to see maybe in the association industry. And so I guess to that point, when you are looking at trying to get others on board, like say an association executive is 100% in alignment with what you're saying right now, and they are struggling to get like boards or program staff to move from a logo and booth mindset to a more of a value driven partnership strategy. How do you suggest that they go about doing that and just sort of shifting the way that people think about these things?
I think there are 3 ways to get internal stakeholders engaged, boards and staffs. And the first is really, I think of an expression that goes back to the political scandal of years ago: follow the money. Where are companies spending money?
Yeah. Yes.
And we don't want to leave money on the table. And I think also, in the same way that associations have had run sponsorship programs the same way for many, many decades, conference sponsorships, logos on stuff. The companies often think of associations the same way. And I was on a call a couple years ago with an association client and a corporate partner, and the company was really pushing back. It was a huge company. Everybody would recognize the name, Fortune 100 company, and it was like a $50,000 sponsorship. And the company, oh, we don't want. We've never spent that much money on a sponsorship. And I said, I have a question. Have you ever spent? Has your company ever spent $50,000 with a marketing agency? It's like, oh yeah, all the time. So we often don't realize how much companies will spend if we really position the association almost like a marketing agency with all these communications channels and segments of members and value propositions and subject matter experts. So we're leaving money on the table. So I think that there is no association that I've run into that has more money than it needs. So they all need the money. We don't want to leave money on the table. So I think that can be one motivator. So we're not going to sell out, but we definitely need the money. Um, Following the competition. So where are the companies going to reach members? And um, for you, it used to be with Google, and now it's with AI. Sometimes associations would do a Google or an AI search. Who would be good sponsors for our company? Excuse me,
Mhm.
for our association. The other way to do that search is to pick a company and say, where would this company go to have access to fill in the blank with whoever your members are? And that can
Okay.
sometimes indicate
Whoa. Yeah, sorry, Bruce. I'm interrupting you
that's
because that's so good. Because for everyone out there who is thinking of how can I use my fancy AI tools? How can I use ChatGPT? How can I use you're offering up some really great ideas on ways to shift the way that you're thinking about researching, playing with ideas on how we can think about the value proposition to our sponsors, to our partners, industry partners who are like, where else would they go? Who would they be
right.
talking to? Where they? I love
Oh,
that. Thank you,
and
Bruce.
this is what I'm sure this is what the companies are doing. They're sitting there
Yeah,
thinking, oh, we want to reach dentists, we want to reach electrical
yeah,
engineers, we want to reach city managers. How would we do that? And does your association come up near the top of the list? Or
yes.
refine the question. We want to reach, we want to provide thought leadership information to dentists. We want to get more dentists as clients for our technology, whatever it is. Ask a bunch of questions and see who's coming up on that list. And if the
Mhm.
answer is do Google ads, or you really should advertise in the Dental Association or the Dental Society magazine or trade publication. Um, so it's following where companies may be going. um, and the big one, because it is always about members first, following members' needs. What do
Mhm.
members need? So associations need two big things. They need revenue, and they need to be able to fulfill members' needs.
Mhm.
And in this complex environment, which includes not only the political and tariff related issues, but other global issues, economic issues, environmental issues, social issues, associations are really good at providing the core information to their members. But those sorts of issues are kind of on the fringe. I don't think there are a
Mhm.
lot of associations that have a lot of that core expertise. However, the partner companies often do have that expertise.
Yeah.
So this is kind of an example that goes back a number of years when the big healthcare reform bill passed, so-called Obamacare, and I was working with an association in the healthcare long-term care space, and we started getting calls from members and state affiliates. What are we supposed to do? I'm hearing that there are a lot of forms we need to fill out. We need to comply with things. It affected both the staff of long-term care residences and nursing homes as well as their residents. So I was at a senior staff meeting, and the CEO was like, "We're getting all these calls from members. How are we responding?" And he looked at the public policy staff and said, "What does healthcare reform say? What do our members need to do?" And the public policy staff said, "The regulation is 1,100 pages, and we haven't quite gone through it yet."
Oh my
That
God.
wasn't the right answer.
Right, right.
But the CEO said, one of our year-long corporate partners is a healthcare consulting firm. I bet they've read all 1,100 pages. Let's call them and say, as part of your partnership, would you work with us on some outreach to members? And they said, great idea. We talked about it. We decided to do a webinar. We decided to do a PowerPoint. The consulting firm did 95% of the PowerPoint. Staff looked it over just to make sure there was nothing salesy in there. It was all very
Mhm.
factual, the right terminology that resonate with members. We co-branded every slide of the webinar with the association's logo and the corporate partners logo. And we launched the webinar, and the faculty for the webinar was the CEO of the association and the CEO of the corporate partner company.
Mhm.
And it got tons of visibility. We kept pushing out the recording for months. So the triple win, members got what they needed. They got the answers on what is healthcare reform all about. The corporate partner looked like a rock star, thought leadership on
Wow.
steroids,
Yeah.
and the association got the revenue. So in that case, $160,000 year long corporate partner program. And so then when we come around to renewal time for that corporate partner program, it's like, oh, remember that great webinar that we did? And they're like, yeah, we need to do more of that in the coming year. So it
Yeah.
solidified that partnership moving forward. So I think it's, and I think those sorts of stories get the attention of boards and staff to say, we need the revenue, companies will pay more, we don't want them to go elsewhere because of the competition factor and the other outlets. And this is really about member needs first. We need
Yeah.
to identify what members need and align that with the company, each corporate partner's expertise.
So, what I think is really interesting about what you're talking about is it's, I think sometimes there can be this idea that, and I'm sorry, I know not everybody sees this the same way, but I think for some organizations, it's almost as if the sponsors, these industry partners are not necessary evil, but it's like, it's almost like they're only seen as being able to step in into these more traditional types of put your logo on the banner kind of things, instead of being the resources and true partners that you're speaking about right now with this example, because you have to understand that company and the types of things that that company does in order to even recognize the opportunity that presented itself in the example you just shared. So this is a great success story, but it's like the next question would be, and how well do you know association executives, like how well do you know these industry partners that you have? Would you be able to identify those great opportunities for potential sponsorship opportunities if they presented themselves? And I think that if you don't have a good enough relationship where you're not sure exactly what that partner does, you wouldn't be able to do that, right?
Right. Yeah, and I talk about this a little bit in the Mastering Association Corporate Sponsorships book, that it really is, and especially for prospective corporate partners, it's really getting to know who they are. And when I've done some training sessions around corporate partners success strategies, and sometimes we get halfway through the day and somebody will say, well, Bruce, those are really interesting ideas, but I reach out to companies all the time and nobody ever responds to my calls.
Yeah.
I'll say, well, tell me about a call. How does that go? And they'll say, well, I have my list, and I'll call a company, and I'll say, well, our convention is coming up in 4 months. We've got platinum, gold, silver, bronze. We only have 2 platinum slots left. If you can call me within a week, I think I can get you in for the platinum sponsorship. Say, that's why they're not calling you back, because
Right.
that's not the value proposition. I said, so let's think about it differently. So as you said, Kiki, let's do some research on the company's website.
Mhm.
Let's look at what their thought leadership is on the website. Do they have a page with client success stories? Do they have
Mhm.
an annual report? Do they have some speeches from their CEO that would indicate what direction their company is going? Do they have any leadership initiatives, for example? And to have that information, but before we call the company, let's go back and identify those member needs.
Mhm.
Let's look at member surveys, what we're hearing from members, talk to our regional or traveling staff and say, what are you hearing from members? And then if members are saying, wow, we really need information on here's our big challenge, and then to find a company that has that expertise. So then if the call to the company is, wow, I saw on your website, you really have a lot of expertise. You have this major corporate women in leadership program. And our association just launched a women in leadership program for our professionals. Can we talk?
Yeah.
Those are the calls that get returned. Now, it's still a lot of discussions after that to turn that into a partnership. Um, And again, it's coaching the company along the way. This is not a sales pitch, but if you've got this program and you're educating your corporate execs on strategies for women leaders, can we have some of that expertise shared with our members in your capacity as our newest corporate partner? And that's when companies, wow, you read our website, you've done some homework. That's much more likely to get the conversation going than the selling the platinum, gold, silver, bronze. We can get you in if you call back within a week.
Yeah. And Bruce, I just want to pause here and remind everyone, I'm going to, if you're watching this later as the replay, if you're watching it now, remind everyone what we're talking about right now is we're talking about some of the information that Bruce has in his book, Mastering Association Corporate Sponsorships, which is really excellent. And you can find this out there. It's out and about. It's on Bruce's website. We'll post that link in a little bit. It's also, of course, on Amazon. Order it, get it in your hands today. But we also have a comment that came in. And so here we go. Strategic partners want a seat at the table, branding. The right ones will lean in and act altruistically for the good of the industry and association. They will even sit at the table with their fiercest competitors. Ideally, their competitors will also act similarly. So excellent post. And thank you so much. This is a good friend of mine and someone that I just had the good fortune to see at MMC and Tech, ASAE's MMC and Tech. And I hope you're really doing well out there, Tony. Yeah.
Great. No, I think that earlier, I saw that earlier comment play out with an association I was working with. The association had a corporate advisory council, and the members were, the council were the board members and senior executives from their year-long corporate partner companies. And the question for the hour was, it was an association of doctors in a specialty area. And the question for the hour, what is the biggest challenge facing this profession? And I'm listening as they go around the table with board members and corporate partners answering the question. And I realized that if I had been blindfolded, I would not have known who was answering the question, the board members or the corporate partners.
Wow.
Because it was the same issues. How do we provide quality care for patients? Challenge of nurse staffing in hospitals, insurance company challenges, regulatory issue challenges, the same issues. So it kind of goes back to the association's members and the sponsor partner companies. Customers are the same people. So then the discussion segued into, wow, what do we do about this now? Well, let's set up a task force with some board members and corporate partners to write a letter to the insurance companies. And let's put together a task force to meet with one of the regulatory agencies. And let's put together a task force to work with some of the big hospital systems on staffing issues. And let's work on this together. And the other advantage, aside from combining the expertise of those two, it really creates a much larger critical mass. It's a 1 + 1 = 3 when the association leader in that space and a company leader in that space go to the agencies, the insurance companies, the media, whoever, together and talk about, this is the challenge facing the profession, and here are our recommendations for improving it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just reminding everyone, if you are watching live, too bad if you're not watching it live, because one of the great things is you're able to do what I'm about to recommend. But ask your questions. Like, if you are watching this live, please put your questions in the comments. I'm happy to pass them along to Bruce, and you can get Bruce to answer your questions live. We'll get some information for you that will be helpful for you specifically. Okay, I actually want to talk about one of my favorite topics right now, which is talking about, this relationship that we have with trust. And certainly right now, when we're talking about using things like AI and technology in the way that we're figuring out how to engage with our members and with our sponsors and all of these different things, the question of acting with integrity and how can we ethically use some of these things, use some of these tools, balance sponsor interests with their mission and member trust. This has to become more and more about, and it has to become something that I think a lot of association executives might get a little nervous about, especially if they work with within sensitive or controversial industries. So with all of that, how, Bruce, do association executives keep integrity front and center when they are, working with sponsors and working with their members and trying to make all of this match up in a way that they can feel good about?
Well, managing that trust and that integrity, starts at the very beginning. So it also starts with board and staff, and I have my kind of three rules of a successful corporate partner program. Rule number one: the association's mission and brand equity come first.
Mm-hmm.
And rule number two is the needs of members come second.
Mm-hmm.
And rule number three is don't forget rules number one and two, because that's all there is. It is truly the association's brand and the needs of its members. And that brand has huge brand equity. And, we often don't talk, I mean, in the corporate sector, that, what is the value of the Coca-Cola brand? And some marketing agency has put billions of dollars of value on that. We haven't done that for associations, and I think we should, because the brand equity of an association is huge. So I think it's making it real clear, first of all, to board and staff, it's mission first and member second. That's all there is. So we're not going to sell out. We're not endorsing products. So everybody agreed we're good to go on this. And then it's carrying that message through to the companies.
Mm-hmm.
And that can also start with, sometimes one of the first things I do with associations when I start consulting with them on their sponsorship program is to do guidelines. Let's put together a set of guidelines that basically says, it's mission first, member second. We will have corporate partners. We're not endorsing products. If there needs to be something in there about, we're not, public policy advocacy is not part of this. We're not going to be lobbying together or commingling issues or whatever. And the last clause of those guidelines is generally, if the partner company violates these guidelines during any point during the year, the CEO of the association has authority to terminate the agreement and money will not be returned.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen it come to that, but that makes it real clear to the company. This is part of the contract. And by the way, there should be contracts. Sometimes associations are like, oh, it was kind of a handshake. They're our corporate partner. So there should be contracts.
Yeah.
The guidelines should be part of those contracts. And it is coaching the companies along the way. So, once that partnership agreement is signed, yes, you can do the webinar and you can't sell. It gets even stricter if it's something like medical, where pharmaceuticals, and pharmaceutical companies know this anyway, they can't be selling pharmaceuticals from the education stage. If it's for education credits, there need to be certain guidelines and firewalls. So it's explaining that to the companies along the way. And one of the things I learned from an education director at an association where I used to work, the idea of coaching companies to educate to sell, don't sell to educate.
Mm-hmm.
Educate to sell, don't sell to educate. And to go out there with that educational message. If you want to sell, that's fine. We have opportunities for that. You can get a bigger booth. You can buy an ad. Be glad to work with you on that. But if you'd like to educate our members on the topics where they need to be informed, that's the nature of this partnership. And the last way to ensure, so we've talked about getting staff and board engaged, getting the companies engaged, and then members, providing members with the information they need.
Mm-hmm.
So if we go down this slippery slope of the company says, oh, we want to do this, we want to do that, and we're thinking, members don't really need that, and they're not going to appreciate that, then it's going to be a problem. But if we actually start these conversations with what do members need from those member surveys, those conversations with members, those conversations with the board, and we find companies to fill in those gaps that all associations have. And I think every association, whether they have 4 staff, 40 or 400, have gaps of knowledge they do not have, or the most current information on regulations or tariffs or whatever, or legal issues, to bring in the companies to provide members with what they need. And then members will say, great, that was useful. And the one other footnote on that, because I think we sometimes think members do not ever want to be sold to, and I don't think that's true. I think that's an urban myth. Now, this is, I know, a challenge for associations, because if a webinar gets a little salesy and a board member who was on the webinar calls the CEO and says, I was too salesy, and then it's like, uh-oh, the companies are selling again. Mm-hmm. But I've been on both in-person workshops with corporate folks and webinars where the questions from the members are, oh, what are the contract terms? How many of our employees have to be signed up for that program? What
Right.
is the
They're
duration of the
asking
con?
for that.
They
They're
are asking for
asking for
that.
that information. Yes.
Now, I know that, again, if it is for credits and it needs to be strictly educational, we just coach the companies ahead of time and we say, those questions will be at the end, or it'll be an hour of
Mhm.
education for credit, another 15 minutes for a discussion that's more product or service related. But members do want that information. We just need to
Yeah.
have those appropriate firewalls at the sessions for credit. But let's follow where members are going. Members are looking for that information. And I think it stands to reason if a company does a real good presentation on how they're providing solutions to members, some members are going to say, oh, how can you do that for me? How do I sign up? How do I pay for that service?
Right. There's a great question that came in, and I'm always thankful for those questions that come in when we are talking live. It says, so we have Bruce. I found that there's the high level sponsors that get that expectation of a return on their investment, but also understand that they're supporting the association. Then there are the reps that are very KPI driven and may not see the forest for the trees. How do you elevate the relationships with those sponsors? Ooh, good question.
Yeah, great question, Anthony. And yeah, the answer is yes, you do need to elevate it. And I think one of the hard things as we transition from the more transactional sponsorship programs to the partnership program is our main contact with these companies is often the exhibitor person.
Mhm.
And you're right, Anthony. They are very transactional. It's like how many badge scans, how big was the logo, how many signs in the convention center. And I was having a conversation a couple of years ago with the VP of marketing at a sponsor company. And I said, well, tell me about your company's marketing goals. How do you measure ROI? And she said, whose answer do you want? I said, I don't understand what you, she said. And kind of to Anthony's point, she said, I have my answer, kind of big view for the company. Here's how we want to be positioned in the marketplace. If you ask the association's main contact with our company, the person who runs our exhibit booth, he's going to talk about badge scans, how many inches big is the sign, and all that. So we do need to find that person in the company who has a more strategic view. And it's, is that asking for an introduction or just going directly to the company's website or LinkedIn and finding a more senior marketing person? But when we ask companies, as I recommend that we do, a whole series of questions. And in fact, in my book, there's a link to some bonus content. And one of those pieces of bonus content is a list of questions you can ask companies. But it's questions like, tell me about your company's goals. How do you want to be positioned in the marketplace? What do you want our members to think about you compared to what they think about you now? Do you want to reach a segment of our members? Um, those are questions that it needs to be a more senior person in the company answering. So we do need to kind of get past that booth person. And there can be a role for both.
Mhm.
And the two actually can leverage each other. So maybe then it's the senior marketing person going to the booth person and saying, you're doing a great job with the booth. And by the way, we are a signature partner for this in the association. Can we have this collateral at the booth to support the work we're doing with the association year long?
I think that's great. And I want to give you a heads up that where we are in our discussion here is we have basically two more questions that I have on my list of questions that I want to make sure to ask you. But then we're also going to go into this rapid fire questions, rapid fire round right at the end. And everybody who is listening to this, or if you're listening to it later, I want you to think about your answers to those too. I want to make sure we have time for that though. So for this next question, and I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on it. Listen, people really, really admire you, Bruce. I admire you a great deal and have listened to your presentations. I've learned from you over the years. You're always very thoughtful in when you're in like collaborative communities and discussion forums and all kinds of stuff. And so I say all of that because you're always sharing really great stories and examples of how people can succeed. But every expert has their hard lesson or their hard lessons, right? And so, what's one lesson that you've learned the hard way in this work? And what would you do differently now? And this may be a tough question to answer. I'm not, but but what would one of those be that was like something that was just hard won knowledge?
I think the hardest lesson, and one that and a lesson learned can make a huge positive difference for association sponsorship programs, is when I started managing a corporate partner program at an association as VP of corporate partnerships. It was the traditional in that it was a calendar year program. So
Hmm.
it was January through December. So doing my due diligence after having run the program for 7 or 8 months, I started calling companies in December and or in November and saying, wow, let's talk. It's been a great relationship for this year. Let's talk about renewing. And they said, and in several instances, they said, wow, we basically set our budget in August. Our fiscal year started in October.
Wow. Yeah.
And I was like, ooh, I should know that. And I didn't. So it's not even just the company's fiscal year. And when does the company actually put pencil to paper and start working on their marketing budget? And I had another experience. One of the first clients that I had 8.5 years ago, I was talking to one of their corporate partners and confidential interview. And I said to the company, you seem to be very satisfied with the relationship you have with the organization. Would you consider increasing your sponsorship spend? And they said, yeah, we'd really like to, but we can't. I said, we like budget constraints or whatever, and said, oh, no, that's not it at all. The association did not have a year-long program. The association had 4 different activities during the year where they were looking for sponsors. And
Hmm.
the marketing VP for the company said, the association comes to us 4 times a year, and we never know exactly when they're going to come to us and what they're going to ask for. And she said, if the company, 2 asks, if the association came to us once a year, when we are working on our budget, we would increase our
Mm-hmm.
spend, leaving money on the
Wow.
table. But she said, for lack of that, for 5 years, every year, when we're working on our budget, we just pencil them in for the same amount because it's
Yeah.
multiple asks. We don't know when and we don't know how much. So, kind of putting all that together, I think knowing, and this is something talking about getting all the internal stakeholders involved. So the association CFO might be saying, oh, all the money needs to come in January 1st. That's how we do our budgeting. Well, the customer is the corporate partner. And if the corporate partner will spend more if we talk to them in September and start their partnership in October, why would we turn that opportunity down? So it just working with the CFO and say, we're just going to need to do things a little differently. And we're not necessarily going to invoice all of them on December 15th for January 1st. We're going to be a little more flexible because it can mean an increase of maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars. And back to kind of the interest and empathy, just saying to a company, question, when do you work on your budgets? Or even if it's
Yeah.
a company that we're prospecting and they say we can't do it. We've spent out this year and we just can't spend any more money. So thanks anyway. And my question would be, great, I appreciate your time. I want to reach you at the right time. When would be a good time to have this discussion? And they're like,
Mhm.
oh, they're actually interested in showing a little empathy and and they'll say, oh, yeah, it would be great if we could have this discussion in July next year. That's when we're working on our budget for our next fiscal year. Thanks for asking. And I reach out to them
Mhm.
in July. But it's kind of the counterpart to how often associations say, they'll get a sales call from a company and the company hasn't looked at the association's website and doesn't realize that's a week of the association's annual meeting and no one's in the office. And it's like, well, if the company is so interested in selling to our association, why aren't they even looking at our website? So my corollary with that is if we really want to sell to companies, let's ask them when they're working on their budgets, and especially
Right.
if we want them to increase that spend.
Oh, totally makes sense. Totally makes sense. Well, I have to ask this question before we move into the rapid fire, and that is for that association executive who is just wanting to elevate their sponsorship program, but they don't even know where to start, Bruce. They're looking at it and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I've got so many things on my plate. I don't know where to begin." What's the very, very first step that you'd recommend?
Um, Aside from reading my book, thank you for that. I would
That's
say
good.
if the person is in charge of sponsorships, to get smart about sponsorship programs, and then the next stop should be talking to the association CEO or executive director because that
Mhm.
person really needs to be bought in. We wouldn't launch or revamp any other program in the association without input and support from the CEO or executive director. So that would be the next stop. And if that person, that association leader, is the CEO. Um, I think it's, having the conversation with the board, having the conversation with senior staff, and taking the lead in getting staff engaged, having roles for every department. Again, this is not an unusual process for associations, and we do talk a lot about silos in associations, but the one area where there are really not silos is the association's annual meeting.
Hmm.
Every department on staff has a role before and usually during and after. So
Yeah.
there is no reason that we can't have that sort of collaboration around a corporate partner program and say, well, here's a corporate partner. They're in here for a year. There's a social media aspect to their benefits and a website aspect and the education aspect and something at the convention. Let's all pull together as a team, like a marketing agency, and meet the needs of those corporate partners. So that leadership needs to come from the top. So we need to get the buy-in from the ED and our executive director early on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right. We're about to go into the rapid fire round. We do have another comment that's in my experience in managing sponsorships and strategic partnerships, associations are grossly undercharging for their partnerships slash sponsorships. Good use of language there. Is that something you've seen? Bruce?
Yes, associations are undercharging. It is partly driven by the fact that companies don't see a lot of value because
Mm,
a lot of that the benefits have been around that visibility. But I think it's understanding the ROI of each corporate partner company, and we can just ask them that question. Again, we're not going to sell for them, but I had worked with a company years ago when I was at the association, and they were a bank, so they
mhm,
finance buildings on member campuses, and they told me what their ROI was. If they got one building financing as a result of that corporate partnership,
mhm.
the fees that they would get from that financing would pay the $160,000 partnership fee.
Wow.
Now, it's going to be different for a marketing agency that's redesigning websites and doing brochures, but understanding what companies' ROI is can be a big driver. And I think it's the other part of that question is we've usually priced sponsorships based on what it costs the association. So the classic example is the coffee break at the convention center. Oh, the coffee break is $5,000. Let's sell the sponsorship for $6,000 and make
Yeah.
a little bit of money. But what if we enhance the value of that coffee break sponsorship to do napkins with the company logo, or coffee cup sleeves with the company logo? Or I worked at a convention once where there was a coffee stand within the convention center, and we worked with the convention center to brand the coffee station,
Mhm.
big signage overhead with the name of the corporate sponsor company. So
Yeah.
then what is the value? Yes, $5,000 for the coffee, but is it $15,000 or $20,000 because of the visibility for the 3 days of the convention and everybody walking around with coffee cup sleeves with the name of the company on it? So it's
Yeah.
thinking about how do we enhance the value along with what is the ROI for each company.
I love that. And that actually gets us into this whole idea of activations and the different things that are possible, some of the creative and innovative things that we've seen. But we'll have to save that for another conversation, Bruce, because it's time for our rapid fire session. And then we're going to bid everyone adieu. But so with that, my very first question for you is rapid fire question. What song instantly puts you in a get it done mode? Get it done mode.
Oh wow, Kiki. Sorry, I don't have a quick answer on that one. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay
Uh,
because okay, I'll give you a little bit more time. That's okay.
okay.
Or we can move on.
I think if anything with a kind of a heavy beat, so whether Rolling Stones or whatever, something that's
Yeah.
really motivating and energizing would be great.
All right. Rolling Stones. I like it. I like it. Okay. Rapid fire question. If you could teach one workshop to new association, oh, this says marketers, but that's not marketers, to new association executives, what would the title be? It could be marketers.
Um, Competition, managing competition to your association.
Oh, managing competition. Good, good. All right. And then the third question that I have, and this is one that I'm trying to ask of many people, and that's, what is one book that has shaped how you lead or communicate in your career?
This is a book that goes back many years, many
Mhm.
decades, a book called Discovering the Future, The Business of Paradigms by Joel
Oh,
Barker.
okay.
And it is, I think, and as much as changed with technology and everything in the last many decades, it is as relevant today as ever. And just a real quick snapshot, we are locked into our paradigms. And Barker talks about examples even within the scientific community, where scientists with all the methodology will come up with the wrong answer because of a
Mhm.
pre-assumption, a paradigm for the way things are. And we
Wow.
often think of this is the way we've always done it, this is the way things are, and that is generally not the case. We are just locked into that, whether it's in the business world, the scientific world, the association world. There are other opportunities out there.
Well, thank you so much for just sharing this time, for writing this book, and also for just being the person that you are, Bruce. I have to say, I've really learned from you. I appreciate your just your energy and who you are in our association community. And I'm really happy that you put this out there so that people can learn, even if they haven't come into contact with you before, they can learn from you and continue to figure out how to make these relationships so much more effective and help us to continue to do the good work that we do. So thank you, Bruce.
Thanks, Kiki.
All right. Okay, everyone. What did you think? What did you think about this episode? What do you think about Bruce's book? What do you think about some of the things you learned? I want to hear all about it. Thank you very much to Bruce Rosenthal for taking the time to write the great book that he did, Mastering Association Corporate Sponsorships, but also for joining me on Association Chat today. And I want to encourage all of you to reach out to Bruce, reach out to him through LinkedIn, check out the book, and really put some of these things into practice in your own association so that we can begin to be able to do more with some of these great partnerships that are available out there. There's a lot of good work that needs to be done, and we need to have the money for the mission, right? So let's think about the ways that we can do that so that we can do a bigger and better job moving forward. So, with that, thank you for joining me today, everyone. And I hope that you'll subscribe to Association Chat. New episodes drop every Wednesday, and Association Chat has a full lineup of big ideas and really extraordinary voices that are coming your way. And until next time, everyone, it is that time. Till next time, everyone, this is Kiki Latayan signing off and reminding you to keep asking questions every day, because as Joseph Campbell once said, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Have a great rest of the week, everyone.